Who's an academic director with the University of Pennsylvania Institute for the Advanced Study of India. Sridharan's area of expertise are party system, electoral finance, and political economy and international relations. And he will be speaking on elections in India today.
What I'll try to do today, in about next 40 minutes or so, is to cover a spectrum of issues. One is about starting from elections, the electoral process, and electoral outcomes, that is actual elections since the early first election, what has happened, and how elections have impacted the evolution of the party system in India, and how the party system again feeds back into affecting elections, and how the party system then leads to the formation of governments, that is coalition politics. So, after independence, India adopted a particular type of electoral system. Now, the electoral system that we have is now India adopted a particular kind of electoral system from the beginning in its Constituent Assembly debates and in the two acts which govern the electoral system in India, the Representation of the People Act 1950 and 1951, which lays down it is the law which governs the holding of elections in India, and an institution, a constitutionally independent body called the Election Commission of India was set up in the Constitution and started functioning from 1951 to hold elections. Now, the electoral system is not, it's of the, what you can say, the Anglo-Saxon type, broadly speaking, which is not typical of electoral systems around the world. Most of them use a different electoral system. I'll come to that in a moment, because the type of electoral system is very important because it affects the party system. Certain types of electoral systems lead to certain outcomes in terms of votes and seats, and especially how seats are allocated in the legislature, in the parliament. And then, depending upon how seats are allocated between parties in parliament, you have different types of government forming. So, the electoral system is very important to understand. Now, the electoral system has certain basic characteristics. One is what is called district magnitude. That is the what we call constituency in India, what is called electoral district, not administrative electoral district. That is how many representatives, how many legislators, how many members of parliament are sent up from one electoral district. Now, India uses the single member district system, single member constituencies. One constituency elects only one MP to the lower house, to Lok Sabha. Okay? So that's called a single member district system. Now, most of the systems around the world are actually not single member district systems. Mostly they are multi-member districts, okay, which could be anything 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 members are elected from a particular electoral district. Okay, so multi-member districts are actually the common practice throughout most of the long-standing democracies, throughout most of Europe, for example, and that also goes along with a different electoral formula. The electoral formula used in India is the simple plurality formula. That is, there is one candidate elected from one constituency. Whoever gets the most number of votes, even if he gets less than half the votes, there's no requirement for a simple majority of votes, 50% plus one. Whoever gets more votes than anybody else gets elected. So that's called the plurality rule. Okay, plurality means the largest single number, even if it's short of a majority. So we use the single member district electoral system and the plurality rule formula. Okay, most systems around the world use actually multi-member districts and what's called proportional representation. Now, the proportional representation system or proportional representation formula or formulae, because there are many different types of proportional representation systems, use a system where the seats are allocated in according to the share of the vote between parties. So if a party gets about, say, 25% of the vote, they get about 25% of the seats, roughly speaking. There are certain sometimes cut-offs. You have to get at least certain percentage of the vote before getting a seat. And then there are number of different proportional representation formulae, what's called PR formulae, which allocate seats to parties in rough proportion to their votes. Now, in our system, the first past the post system, what is called the simple plurality system is also called first past the post. Now, first past the post is misleading because it implies there's a fixed post. You go past it, you get elected. There's no fixed post. It's not that you get 40% of the vote or 30% of the vote, you get elected. You have to get the single largest number of votes. That is, you have to get a plurality of votes in that single member constituency to get your party to get their candidate elected. Okay, so what's called the plurality rule system, or somewhat inaccurately first past the post system, is our system and goes with single member districts. Okay, single member constituencies. Now, we think this is the natural system, but I think I'm just putting things in perspective. We need to understand that this is actually not typical, not common. It's only the Anglo-Saxon democracies which use these typically, and also a lot of the ex-British colonial countries which use the single-member district and plurality rule electoral system. Now, I am emphasizing this because this system has certain implications for votes and seats. Now, how seats are allocated to candidates and implicitly to parties based on votes differs. Typically, there is a formulation in the literature called Duverger's law, which you might have heard of, which says that Duverger's law says essentially that the first past the post system, the simple plurality rule system with single member districts, tends towards a two-party system. Okay? And Duverger was a French political scientist who argued this back in 1954, in the early 50s. And he said that if you have single member constituencies and a first past the post system, then at the constituency level and by implication at the national level, you will have a two-party system emerging gradually. And his argument went like this. His argument was that there are basically two effects which lead to this outcome. And he said that one is the mechanical effect, and other he said was the psychological effect. Okay, mechanical effect, he meant that the parties which get the single largest number of seats tend to get overrepresented. So, and by the psychological effect, he meant that voters will learn over time to not to quote unquote waste their vote on parties which are not going to have any chance of getting elected. The non-leading parties' supporters, that is the opposition space, will tend to, opposition voters will tend to consolidate around a single principal opposition party. So you will have a leading party and a principal opposition party coming up, so two-party system, because voters will not waste their votes on third, fourth and other parties, minor parties. All right. So his argument was that single member district and first past the post system, you will gradually have a two-party system emerging, at least at the constituency level. And he logically applied it, he extended this, extrapolated this to the national level. So he argued that first past the post systems will tend towards two-party systems. And he pointed to the Britain, where you had two major parties, the Conservatives and Labour. He pointed to the US House of Representatives, where you have two major parties, the Republicans and Democrats. And this is the outcome of the single-member district plurality rule system. Okay. Now, if you have a different type of district and different type of electoral formula, if you have multi-member districts where in the number of seats, suppose you have a five-member district, how do those 5 members, how do get elected? They get allotted seats in proportion to their vote share. Parties get allotted seats in proportion to their vote share. So roughly, there are a variety of PR formulae, but broadly speaking, it is a proportional allocation of seats to votes. Now that typically leads to a no single party getting a majority. That typically leads to a very multi-party legislature being elected. And then the formation of coalitions to form a government, to have a simple majority in the parliament. So proportional representation systems tend to lead to multi-party systems and to coalition politics. Okay? So these are the two broad systems. So in India, we adopted a single member district, simple plurality rule system. The major revolution was that unlike the 1935 Government of India Act and the limited franchise elections held under colonial rule, we adopted universal franchise at the time of independence. And also there was initially there was about 1/3 of the constituencies in India in the first two elections, 1952 and 1957, were 2-member and some 3-member constituencies. Then those 2-member and 3-member constituencies were abolished in 1961, just before the third general elections of 1962. Okay? So then we switched entirely to a single-member district system. The other characteristic of our political system, of our electoral system, which is of course part of the larger political system, was that there was reservation of constituencies for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes allotted on a state-wise basis in proportion to their population in the state. So nationally in the Lok Sabha, about 22.5% of the seats, about 15% for scheduled castes and about 7.5% for scheduled tribes, were reserved, where all parties had to put up only a candidate from that category, from the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, for those reserved seats. Okay? So there was reservation of about 22.5%, which has now been slightly revised because of the slight increase in the population of SCs and STs with the delimitation of 2009. So this was the electoral system, that is the district magnitude and electoral formula and reservation adopted. This was the basic parameters of the electoral system. The laws governing elections were the Representation of the People's Act 1950 and 1951, which laid out in great detail how elections to be conducted, and they were to be conducted by an independent constitutional body, the Election Commission, okay, headed by a Chief Election Commissioner. At that time, only one Chief Election Commissioner, although the government was allowed to appoint additional election commissioners. And the Chief Election Commissioner was, in the case of additional election commissioners, something which came about in the 90s, was the first among equals, although all three were technically equal. Okay? So this was the system adopted as far as elections go. Now, before I give you the results of the elections, I mean and how elections have evolved, just a few words about the Election Commission. Now, the Election Commission is an independent body, but it draws its personnel to conduct elections mostly from government servants, that is from civil servants and largely school teachers who man the election booths and so forth at the time of elections. And they have, the Article 324 gives the Chief Election Commissioner a very broad constitutional remit, a very broad autonomy, which covers the whole of the superintendent's direction and control of elections, of the electoral roll, of preparing the electoral rolls, updating the electoral rolls, and of conduct of the elections. So, at the time of elections, the entire regular administration where the elections are being held comes under the Election Commission's orders, and they can transfer officials, they can transfer district magistrates, collectors, they can transfer even tehsildars and people below that. The entire state machinery comes under the Election Commission's control, and they have very broad powers. Now, these powers were not really used. The Chief Election Commissioners did not really assert their powers until the end of the Congress hegemony phase. I mean, there was some assertion during the early 80s and some late 80s, and then in the post-Congress hegemony phase. By that I mean the post-1989 phase, when in the elections, in the 7 general elections which have been held from 1989, that is 1989, 91, 96, 98, 99, 2004 and 2009, no single party for the last 7 elections has got a majority on its own. Okay? Parties have had to form minority governments or coalitions, including minority coalitions, which, like the present one, which itself needs external support. Okay? So in the post-Congress hegemony phase, the first Chief Election Commissioner to assert powers in a major sense was T.N. Sheshan in 1990 to 1996. And then the government brought in 2 additional election commissioners in 1995, in 1993 actually, but the court, Sheshan went to court, the court ruled in favor of the government appointing 2 additional commissioners, so it became a 3-member election commission of a chief election commissioner and 2 other election commissioners from 1995 according to a 5-0 Supreme Court bench judgment. And since then it has remained like that. And the election commission has increasingly asserted its power to control the administration and also to regulate political parties, to force them to hold, at least go through the motions of holding internal elections, and to attempts to impose transparency on political parties, on the use of money, they have to, since 2003, declare the criminal records, educational background, and the financial assets of all candidates. All parties have to declare these 3 bits of information about all candidates since 2003. And there are stricter controls of the use of money in politics and exit polls which could affect subsequent rounds of voting were banned from publication from 2009. So there have been a variety of stringent measures taken by the Election Commission to ensure that elections are free and fair. In the last 2 decades, in the 90s and 2000s, the Election Commission has become much more assertive and actually tried to assert the full potential of its powers under Article 324 to 328. Okay, so that is the background of the evolution of the Election Commission as an institution. Now, to come back to the elections themselves, now one can look at the electoral regime in India. By an electoral regime, I mean a series of elections fought under basically the same rules. That is, the same constituencies, the same broad rules. So you can look at 3 rough electoral regimes in terms of outcomes. One is the first 4 elections. That is 1952, every 5 years. Of course, like in the parliamentary system, a government can call an early election, which sometimes has happened. There have been some 5 early elections. So in 1952, 57, 62 and 67, the first 4 general elections had one type of result. And along with these, the state assemblies also go to the polls every 5 years, sometimes early elections. Okay. Now, then the second regime was 1967 to 1989. Those 22 years, you had general elections. After 67, you had 71. You had 77 at the end of the internal emergency, when for the period of about a year and a half, India's democracy was suspended, although constitutionally, although misuse of the emergency provision. So you had 1971, 77, 80, 84 and 89. So that period, 67 to 89, was another phase. I'll describe the characteristics of this phase, these phases later. And then post-89, that is 89, 91, 96, 98, 99, 2004 and 2009. Okay, in the post-89 phase. So let me just give you the broad parameters of what happened during these phases, not only at the Lok Sabha parliamentary level, but also at the state level, because these 2 levels interact. Because political parties exist and contest elections at both levels, at the state level and the national level, parliamentary level. So the same political parties are players at both levels, and one level affects another. Okay, how they perform in the state assembly elections affects their prospects in the parliamentary election, and vice versa, affects the credibility, their prospects of victory. So just to say a word about parties. Now, political parties are actually not mentioned in the Constitution until as late as 1985, when the 52nd Constitutional Amendment, that is what's introduced the 10th schedule, what was called the anti-defection law, where 1/3 of the legislators of a political party are required to collect together to make a defection valid without getting disqualified from the legislature of parliament or of a state. And that has then been, after 2003, it has been amended to make it 2/3. So what that did was to empower party leaderships. That is, before that, legislators, MPs and MLAs in the states could defect in 1s and 2s. After that, they had to gather to be 1/3. So in large states with large legislatures, that one-third is a large number of people. So it means a major collective action problem in gathering one-third to be able to defect legally without getting disqualified. But basically what I was saying was political parties were not mentioned in the constitution. I mean, parties can contest elections, so can independents. Like in most democracies, independents get only a small percentage of the vote. There are a large number of independents, they get only a small percentage of the vote. Very few get elected. It is mostly, elections are really about parties and party victories, because parties win, get most of the seats and form governments, okay, in the states and the center. Now, the first 4 general elections, 52, 57, 62, 67, were similar, with some change in 67, was a turning point, in the sense that you had one major party, the Congress party, which was the umbrella party of the independence movement, surrounded by a variety of smaller parties with a base only in some parts of the country, some states. Okay? Congress was an all-India party with a base in every state. It won a majority of seats in the Lok Sabha, sometimes 2/3 majority in those 4 elections, on the basis of less than half the vote. That is, Congress got percentage of the vote in the 40s, not more than 50%. Between 40 and 50%, that is a plurality of the vote. Single largest number of votes compared to any other party. That converted into a majority of seats. Now that is a property of the first past the post or simple plurality system. In theory, a party can get, say, 51% of the votes in all constituencies and win 100% of the seats, and no other party get any seat. If a party gets 51% of the vote in all constituencies, and the rest of the voters, the other 49% vote for some other parties, but this party can sweep all the seats. Okay, so the characteristic, a major characteristic of the first past the post system is the seat vote disproportionality. That is, the party which gets the largest percentage of the seat of the votes gets a disproportionately high percentage of the seats. So the Congress in the first 4 elections got percentage of the vote in the 40s and percentage of seats in the 60s, sometimes over 2/3. Okay, that was the characteristic of the first 4 elections. And this is also the seat vote disproportionality of the plurality rule system, or the first past the post system, is also what Duverger called the mechanical effect. You get a certain percentage of votes, you get a disproportionate percentage of the seats. Okay, so now this same pattern also applied in most of the states at that time. At that time, in the first 4 elections, you had simultaneous elections to the state assemblies of almost all states, along with the Lok Sabha elections, in 52, 57, 62, 67. Okay? And you had a similar result happening in most of the states, with 1 or 2 exceptions like Kerala, where the Congress party got either a small simple majority, just over 50%, or just percentage of vote in the 40s, and a majority, including 2/3 majority of the seats in the state assemblies. So they ruled almost all states, based getting majorities on the basis of only a plurality of the vote. Okay? So this pattern then changed in 1967, where you had, out of the 16 major states at that time, the Congress party lost power in the state assembly elections in 8 major states out of 16, and its percentage of the vote in the Lok Sabha elections fell to just 40%, its lowest till then, which translated into just a small majority, just a little over 50% of the vote. So it came down quite a bit, and the opposition space was highly divided. Now these results you had because the opposition space in the first 4 elections was divided. That 55% or so of the vote which went to the non-Congress parties, no party got more than 12 to 15%. You know, you had parties getting 15%, 12%, 8%, 7%, 5%, like that. All of them having a base only here, there, in different states. You know, the socialist parties in UP, Bihar, the CPI in West Bengal, Kerala, and a few places, sometimes regional party here, there, Akalis in Punjab. So, you know, you had a variety of parties. So the non-Congress space was splintered in the nationally and in every state into a variety of parties. Now this whole, the first 4 elections phase changed. This system changed in the period between 1967 and the 1989 election, and all the state assembly elections which went along with that. One important development after 1967 was that the state assembly elections increasingly did not coincide with the Lok Sabha elections, because several state assemblies had midterm elections in 1969, Then there was an early Lok Sabha election 1 year before time in 1971. Then you had a late Lok Sabha election 1 year because of the emergency of 75 to 77. You had a late Lok Sabha election in 77. Then you had an early Lok Sabha election in 80 because the Janata Party government collapsed early. And then you had 85, 89. Then you had a series of early elections. You have 91, 96, the full term, then 98, 99, then again full term 2004, full term 2009. So because of the sometimes early and late elections in the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies, you had increasingly, they were not simultaneous. Now this meant that a variety of state level parties, okay, what are called regional parties. I mean, Election Commission doesn't call them regional parties, they call them state parties. You have national parties which have above a certain percentage of votes and or seats in 4 or more states. Then you call it a national party. Right now national parties are just about 6. I mean, you have Congress, BJP, CPM, you have BSP, and I think one or two other national parties, 6 national parties. And you have about something like 30 plus state parties, which are significant share of vote and seats in their state. Now, most of these state parties are single state parties. So when you say regional party, it's a misnomer, although that's the common term used in the media. Regional implies that you are in at least 2 or more states in a region. So 2 or more states in South India or Northeast India, or East India, West India, Northwest. But it's not like that. All these regional parties are basically single state parties. And those which have a base in 3 states, like say the CPM, are not in 3 states of different regions. One, West Bengal, Kerala, and Northeast, Tripura. So, yeah, Shiv Sena, one single state, like that. Akali Dal, single state. National Conference, single state. DMK, single state, like that. AGP. So these regional parties are actually single state parties. Now, post 67, you had the 2 major changes happening, one of which was not really visible. One was visible. You had changes happening in the party system and the outcome of elections in the state level. Now, that outcome of elections in the state level was not reflected in the parliamentary level. I'll explain that in a moment. What you had was, apparently, if you look at the outcome of parliament, you had the same result from 1967 through to the 1984 election, before 89 happened. Okay? You had 1967, 71, 77, 80 and 84 in this 1967 to 89 phase, again throwing up the same kind of Lok Sabha result, that is a plurality of the vote of only in the percentage in the 40s of the leading party, leading to a majority of seats and formation of a single party government. Okay? In this whole phase, 67 to 89. Okay? You had Congress, single party Congress governments forming, except the Janata Party, 77 to 80, which was also a unified single party. It was a coalition, but it was called itself a single party, Janata Party. And they also got, they also won what was called a Congress victory in reverse. That means they won a plurality of the vote, about 42%, and got a majority of seats. So, majority of seats based on plurality of vote. Similarly, you have the same result, majority of seats based on plurality of the vote, single party majority government in 67 to 89. Okay? Now, underlying this in the state, something quite different was happening, which then created the foundation for the post-89 hung parliaments, where no single party gets a majority, and you have multi-party system and coalition politics. Okay? What was happening in the state level between 67 and 89 was the rise of a variety of state level parties, okay, which became significant contenders for state power in their states, and they formed state governments and they ruled. So what was happening was, Duvaja's law, which said that the first past the post system, that is a plurality, single member district, simple plurality system, tends towards a 2-party system. Increasingly in state after state, you have 2-party systems emerging, or bipolar systems. Either 2 parties, or 2 coalitions, or a party versus a coalition. So bipolar. You had bipolar party systems emerging because of the election results in state after state after state between 67 and 89. So state level bipolarization of party systems happened in the 67 to 89 phase. Now these were of 3 types. Unlike in the US, say you have the same bipolarity, Republicans versus Democrats in all the 50 states. In India, you began to have roughly 3 kinds of bipolarities. Okay? Or rather, you began to have roughly 4 kinds of bipolarities emerging in the 67 to 89 phase. In the state level, state assembly elections, you had Congress versus Janasangh, Janasangh was the ancestor of the BJP. In Delhi, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, okay, you had Congress versus a regional party happening in Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and later in the 80s in Andhra Pradesh, TDP, and Assam AGP. Okay, so then you had Congress versus left parties in West Bengal, Kerala, Tripura. So you had Congress versus BJP, BJP, ancestor of BJP, Congress versus left, Congress versus some regional party. Okay, in state after state after state. And also Congress versus, after the Janata period, after 1980, the Janata Party fragments, which became the Janata Party in Karnataka, in some other places. You had the Janata Party fragments, okay, which later became Janata Dal when they got reunified under VP Singh in the late 80s, and then the Janata Dal broke up in the 90s into different Janata Dal. The Janata Dal United in Bihar, Janata Dal Secular of Deve Gowda in Karnataka, the Biju Janata Dal in Orissa, and so forth. And Samajwadi Party emerged out of that in UP. Lalu Prasad Yadav's RJD, Rashtriya Janata Dal, emerged out of that in Bihar. So you had the Janata Dal fragment. So you had four kinds of bipolarity. Okay. Now, post 89, you had 7 elections where the leading party's plurality of the vote no longer converted into majority of seats. That is, in 1989, the Congress for the first time fell below 40% of the vote, 39.6. That below 40% no longer converted into a majority of seats. They got only 197 seats, which was well short of the 272 halfway mark. So they sat back in the opposition, and a coalition government was formed of VP Singh, supported from outside by BJP and left. Okay. In 1991 again, so in 7 elections since then, the plurality of the vote, the Congress has retained throughout the plurality. They've got the single largest number of votes, though not necessarily seats, in all the elections since 91, including even in 98, when the BJP was just 0.5% behind them in vote share. So in the elections of 89, 91, 96, 98, 99, 2004, 2009, Congress retained a shrinking plurality of vote coming up in the last couple of elections. They fell from below 40% for the first time, 39.6 in 89. They came all the way down to 25.5, 25.8 in 98. Now they've climbed to about 28.6, but still below 30%. So now what happened in the post-89, that is the hung parliaments phase, what was basically happening was visibly what was happening was something. Then underlying that there was something else. Okay? Visibly what was happening was there were 3 mega trends. 3 mega trends of the post-89 phase, last 7 elections. Those are decline of Congress from vote share of 40% to vote share of 25.8 into 1998 up to about 29% in the last election, okay, 2009. So the decline of the Congress vote share, and therefore decline of Congress seats also. Then with a rise in the last election to 206, but still well below the halfway mark, well below the majority mark. Then the second mega trend was rise of the BJP. BJP in the Janasangh, which was formed in 1951, it reached a maximum of not even crossing 10% of the vote in 1967. Then it crossed 10% for the first time in 1989 when it formed a pre-electoral coalition with the Janata Dal of VP Singh. Went to 11%. Then it jumped to 20%. The Babri Masjid agitation took it to 20% in 1991, remained at 20% in 1996, but 1/3 increase in votes from 120 in seats, from 120 seats to 160 seats. Okay, 1/3 increase in seats with same share of vote. 20%, then 25% in 1998 as part of a coalition, the NDA coalition, and then declined 23% in 1999, then again declined to about 22% in 2004, 18.8%, about 19% in 2009. So the rise of BJP, decline of Congress, first mega trend post 89, second mega trend post 89, rise of BJP, third mega trend post 89, rise of the third parties, rise of the regional parties. Okay, the left remained fairly static, 6 to 8% of the vote, roughly speaking, 6 to 9%. But the regional parties, that is, which are of roughly, one is purely regional, sort of regional linguistic, ethnic, cultural parties, like DMK, Akali Dal, etc., which represent specific groups. Second is the Janata Dal fragments, Samajwadi Party, RJD in Bihar, Biju Janata Dal, JDS, the Samta Party, which then became JDU, etc. And the third is the left parties. So the non-Congress, non-BJP space, the regional party space increased their share. That was the third big mega trend post-89. Now, what is behind these mega trends? Decline of Congress, rise of BJP, rise of regional parties. Okay, is what is happening at the state level. Now, I explained what happened at the state level. Underlying what seemed to be the same system at the Lok Sabha level, that is a single party getting plurality of vote, converting to majority of seats, forming single party majority government between 67 and 89. That converted to the largest single party, the party getting a plurality of the vote, the Congress party falling below 40% and then below 30% of the vote, no longer converting to majority of seats, variety of other parties coming up, and therefore a fragmented parliament, hung parliament, where no single party gets a majority. Parties have to form coalitions or take outside support for their coalition to form a government. So you had all the governments formed since 1989 have been minority governments, and most of them have been minority coalitions, including the present one, which is a minority coalition, which has a majority only by the external support of the Samajwadi Party and the BSP in the present Lok Sabha. Okay? You had the first government, 1989 government, minority government of the Janata Dal and its small allies, supported from outside by BJP and left. Then you had the Chandrasekhar government, which had only 10% of the seats in parliament, 554 seats, supported by outside by the Congress party. It lasted about 7 months. Then you had the Congress party of P.V. Narasimha Rao, right, full term, 91 to 96, but it was a minority government. It halfway through its term, through defections, it attained a majority, but for half its term, it was a minority government. Then you had the United Front government, a multi-party government supported from outside by Congress and CPM, 96 to 98, which had two prime ministers, Deve Gowda and Gujral. And then you had the first Vajpayee government, 98-99, one-year government, which was a minority coalition supported from outside, and that fell. Then you had the NDA government, full term, 99 to 2004, but it was also a minority coalition with outside support. And then you had the two UPA governments, 2004 to 2009 and 2009 to the present, both minority coalitions dependent on outside support. Okay, so this has happened because at the state level, the tendency towards the bipolarization of state level party systems, that is, at the state level, increasingly are bipolar systems. Two parties, like Congress versus BJP, or two coalitions, United Front versus Left Front in Kerala, or Congress versus Left, Congress versus Regional Party, Congress versus Janata Dal fragment. Okay, almost all states have now bipolar party systems, except the biggest state of UP, which has a four-cornered contest. You have the Samajwadi Party, BSP, BJP, and Congress, all fighting separately without coalitions. Except for UP, the rest of the states are all basically bipolar. Okay, so that underlying bipolarity, what it does is it creates pockets of strength for a variety of regional parties, which then can contest credibly and win seats, Lok Sabha seats, from those pockets of strength in their states. Okay, from their particular stronghold states. So that what you have bipolar party systems across states, but that results in a highly fragmented multi-party Lok Sabha, and therefore the necessity to form coalition governments or minority coalition governments with external support to form a government at the center. So this is the third phase post 89. So you have these three phases: the Congress hegemony phase, 60s, 52 first elections of 52 to 67. Then decline in Congress hegemony, looking the same at the center, but changing underlying at the state by bipolarization of state systems, state party systems, 67 to 89. Then the hung parliaments at the center and bipolar systems at the states, post 89, that is post Congress hegemony system. So you have three broad phases of the elections in India, okay, and with the result of on the party system and the result on the kind of government formed. So I have given you a broad picture. Now, this is the evolution of the electoral system and of elections, their results, and of the party system in India. Okay, so now apart from that, I've talked about the election commission, the mechanics of elections, and so forth. The significant change was that elections have become increasingly freer and fairer as the election commission has been able to assert itself in the last 2 decades in the post-Congress hegemony phase against a backdrop of no single party dominating. The election commission has been able to assert its powers under Articles 324 to 329 and ensure increasingly cleaner elections. Although there is still phenomena like paid news, there are things like that which are happening, but the earlier kind of rigging and booth capturing, which used to happen in the 80s and early 90s, has increasingly become a thing of the past, because with new technology and new communications, there's intense media scrutiny. Anybody who does anything wrong will very soon gets exposed immediately or will get exposed. So it's more difficult to do the old kind of electoral rigging, which used to happen in some places in the 70s and 80s. So the best test of a free and fair election is whether the losing side accepts the result. And by that criterion, elections have become freer and fairer. The losing candidates, the losing parties accept the result as fair. Okay? So this is sort of, briefly speaking, in the last 40 minutes, I've sketched the evolution of the party system, of the electoral system and party system in India, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Could you throw some light on the concept of this third front which is coming these days? Third front?
Third front is the non-Congress, non-BJP space. Now, the non-Congress, non-BJP space, as I said, has expanded. You know, in the 7 elections since 1989, about something like 4 or 5 of those elections, the Congress plus BJP votes are less than half the votes. More than half the votes go to parties other than Congress and BJP. This was the case in 90. This was the case from 96 onwards. From 96 onwards, Congress plus BJP vote share is less than half of the total votes.
Well, there's a debate that whether they should declare their funding and the way they spend money, while the party says no, it is not from the public's.
Yeah, you see, the debate between the law ministry and the election commission is that the election, the current rule is that how do parties raise money? Parties raise money through private donations or contributions. Okay? Now, the history of this is that parties always raise money through memberships and contributions. Memberships are very tiny amounts. People pay a small amount. They raise money basically from contributions from wealthy people and companies, businesses. Okay. Now, they have been tax exempt from 1979, but they have to file a tax return every year, giving their incomes and expenditures, even though they are not taxed. They were not doing that till 1996, till the Supreme Court gave an order in 1996 in response to an NGO called Common Cause filing a public interest litigation, and they had to then, every year since 96, all parties have to file tax returns. However doctored those figures may be, they've had to file tax returns. Then, in 2003, there was a change in the law which said that companies and individuals can get tax benefits. If they give by check above board and they declare it, they can get a tax that is 100% tax deductible, what their political contribution is. So that gave some incentive for a lot of big companies to come above board and give money not in black but by check and collect a tax return, collect a tax rebate. All right. Now, but the parties, what has been happening to their income? According to the Association of Democratic Reforms, which is an NGO, they have, under the Right to Information Act, managed to, after a lot of fighting, all the parties resisted. But the Chief Information Commissioner, since 2008, has said that parties' income tax returns are of public interest, and they have to declare. They have been able to get the Income Tax Department to reveal the party's incomes and expenditures from the year 2003-04 onwards. So the bulk of the law says that any donation of over 20,000 rupees to a political party, the donor has to be identified. You have to give the name of the individual or company who gives this donation of 20,000 rupees and above. But if the check comes less than 20,000 rupees, or amount comes less than 20,000 rupees, even if it's 19,999, you can write 100 checks. Of 19,999, you don't have to declare, the party does not have to declare the identity of the donor, whether it's an individual or company. Now, the result from the RTI information which has come out about party incomes and party expenditures, only the donations of over 20,000 rupees, where the donors have to be identified, is only a small part of party incomes for most parties. A lot of parties, including the BSP, last time they said they got 172 crores all in amounts of less than 20,000. So nobody knows who are these donors, where this money is coming from. Now somebody can give crores and divide it into small amounts of 20,000 each. The same person or same company. They don't have to be identified. So the bulk of the income of parties comes from amounts of less than 20,000, where the identity of the donor does not have to be specified. So all that we don't know. We don't know who are these people. Maybe it is genuinely small members who are giving 100 rupees each, but it's not likely. Highly unlikely. It's most likely it is hidden money where the donors' identities are not revealed, which are being given in small amounts so that the party does not have to declare. They can just say that we got all our income, or 80%, 90% of our income in small amounts of less than 20,000 rupees. So we are not legally obliged to reveal. Now what has happened recently in the last 1 month or 2 months is that the Election Commission has proposed that this, in the interest of full transparency, everybody who gives money to a political party, even below 20,000 rupees, whatever small amount, has to be identified. So and so gave this much. So they said there should be full transparency of donations to political parties. And the government is resisting. All the parties are resisting. Yeah.
So is the solution of party with anti-democratic because it effectively forces the members to go by what the party decides, and so hence like they don't have a choice of presenting their own views and opinions.
Yeah, to some extent, the party whip really destroys inner party democracy, because you are forcing the legislators, the MPs or MLAs, to vote in the parliament or assembly according to what the party leadership wants. So in that case, the intra-party democracy will change. Then you don't need to go and ask them anything. You can just, once the leadership decides, everybody has to do the same thing. This actually, it's not just a party whip. The anti-defection law, before 1985, MPs or MLAs could defect from their party and cross the floor in the assembly or the parliament and go to another party. That became banned from 1985 unless they can muster 1/3 support among the sitting MPs or MLAs. 1/3 of the party has to be agreeable to defect. Otherwise, they will get disqualified. They will lose their seats. So the disqualification, if you are less than 1/3, that made it more difficult to defect. It made it quite easy to defect in small assemblies, like in the assemblies like Goa, which has 40 seats, or like many northeastern states with 60-seat assembly. So a 60-seat meaning if you have a majority of, say, 31 seats, then you need only 1/3. That means you need 11 people. 11 people, you can, in one evening, you can make phone calls, get together and decide to defect. But if you have an assembly like UP assembly, then you need a huge number to coordinate, And then the other side can also coordinate. They can also bribe them and say, that it's more difficult to defect. So the 1/3 rule under which at least which you need to defect without, to split a party without getting disqualified, that was brought in by the anti-defection law. That is the 52nd Amendment of 1985, March 85, which Rajiv Gandhi brought in to protect his majority. He got over 400 seats. So that law, in fact, more than the whip, is responsible for the stifling of intra-party democracy. It has had some good effect in the sense that otherwise, people could be bought and sold in ones and twos. Now you have to do wholesale trade, not retail, not small numbers. So it becomes more difficult. The buying and selling of legislators, bribery, is made more difficult by the anti-defection law. But the anti-defection law has also a side effect of stifling dissent within parties and empowering the leaderships, which is what you're talking about. जी किसके पहले? अच्छा, नहीं, वो तो अमेंडमेंट हुआ था. आई थिंक दैट एज का अमेंडमेंट आई थिंक 1989 इलेक्शन में हुआ था. 1989 इलेक्शन पहली बार आई थिंक 18-year-olds वोट कर सके, तो उसका ज़्यादा असर नहीं पड़ा. आई थिंक द young people, a lot of the young people at that time, according to the CSDS surveys, voted for BJP in 89 and 91. So I think they got a big boost because they went from 11% vote in 89 to part of that Babri Masjid movement to 20% in 91. They remained 20% in 96. So I think a lot of the young people then got mobilized into voting for Janata Dal and BJP, for anti-Congress parties, perhaps. That is some of the data, if I remember right, the survey data shows that. Uske baad, once it has become normal to vote from 18, I don't think there's a significant difference between the young voters, 18 to 21, and those who are older. I don't think it changes from election to election, but there's no consistent pattern.
Based on the history of India's electoral process, can you make a prediction, an educated guess on what will happen in the next Lok Sabha election? How do you see that election happening?
Next Lok Sabha election, if it is held on time, it could be held early also. I think it will be heavily affected. It will be to some extent a collection of state level races, not just one national race, but a collection of state level races. So a lot depends also on what happens in the coming assembly elections, especially Delhi, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, which are going to happen. Congress, BJP straight fights in November, by November. And what will happen possibly in Jharkhand, might also have an election by the end of this year. So a lot of things depend on what will happen in the intervening assembly elections. And what will happen state-wise? If you look at the elections as a collection of state-level races, 28 states and 7 union territories, including Delhi. Now, in a bipolarized party system at the state level, if you are the number 1 or number 2 party, if you are among the top 2, then you can sweep the. If the vote share goes in your favor, you can sweep. You can get most of the seats from that state. If it goes against you, you can get wiped out. You'll get relatively few seats from the state. But in the states where you're number 3, number 4, you're not in the top 2, then you can only hope to pick up a few seats, relatively small number of seats. So then, if you look at the prospects of Congress and BJP, if you add up the states, add up the seats in the states where they are number 1 or number 2, in the top 2. Now, Congress is in the first 2, number 1 or number 2, in all states except 4 states. That is, except UP, Bihar, West Bengal and Tamil Nadu, where they are number 3, number 4. So those you take out 201 seats. So from 543 you subtract 201. So the states where Congress is in the first 2 add up to 342 seats. But even then, to get a majority, to get 272, which is the halfway mark in a house of 543 elected seats, okay, to get 272 out of 342 is very difficult, impossible. So the Congress, but even then the Congress is relatively better placed in the sense that the states in which they are number 1 or number 2, states and union territories in which they are number 1 or number 2, without allies, add up to 342 seats. The BJP, if you take the states in which they are number 1 or number 2, if you add up the seats of those states, they add up to 169 seats. If you add the states where they have allies, like Shiv Sena and Maharashtra, if you add Maharashtra, 169 plus 48 seats of Maharashtra, that's 217, plus 13 seats of Punjab with Akalis, they are 230 seats. If you add 40 seats of Bihar, before the JDU, before Nitish Kumar left, they would reach 270. So even then, the states in which the BJP is number 1 or number 2, if you add up the seats of all those states, they add up to 169 seats for BJP alone. With allies, with Shiv Sena and Akalis, that is Maharashtra and Punjab seats, it adds up to 230 seats. So if you say Congress, the seats of states in which Congress is number 1 or number 2, which they can potentially sweep or they can get swept against, either way, but they can potentially sweep, 342 seats. Seats where BJP and allies are number 1 or number 2, where BJP can sweep and get a lot of seats with its allies, is 230 seats. So there's a gap of something like more than 100 seats. So the BJP still will find it difficult compared to the Congress, because they don't have a base. They are not number 1 there are a lot of states in which they don't have a base. They are not number 1 or number 2. Okay? So therefore they are relatively speaking, at a disadvantage. Most of the states of the east and south, they don't have, except Karnataka in the south, and except Bihar, Jharkhand in the east, they are not number one or number two position. So they have to stand a good chance, they have to expand their base across more states, which is difficult to do in this period between now and the next election.
So you think the BJP or the NDA coalition is being overly confident about their next show in the Lok Sabha elections? Because right now it seems they're very confident that they will make the government next time.
No, they are projecting that image, but I'm just counting the numbers. If you look at the numbers, if you just add, like I said, where are the BJP, if it's in the first two, number one or number two party in the state, you add up all the seats of those states, 169 seats, plus 48 Maharashtra, which is where they have Shiv Sena, plus 13 Punjab, that is plus 61, 169 plus 61, 230 seats, which is less than halfway mark, less than 272. So even if they sweep all the 230 seats, they still need allies to form government outside. They have to get post-election allies. Now, to get 230 or a % score, impossible. So if they get out of 230, if they get say 160, 170, 180, then they will still need, if they get say 180, they will still need another 92 seats, some allies from other states to get, who will support them. So the task that they face is not easy. A lot depends also on what happens in the direct Congress BJP states, direct fight. Like direct Congress BJP states, if you add up, where do the Congress and BJP, how many seats do the states where the direct Congress BJP fight, how many seats are they? Okay. If you add, starting from, say, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, that's 9 seats, plus Delhi, that 7 seats, that's 16. 16 plus, you can say, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, that's 65 seats. So that is 16 plus 65, that is 81 seats, plus Gujarat, Daman and Diu, that is 28, plus 2 Goa, so that is 81, plus 30, that is 111, plus 28 seats in Karnataka, that's 139. 139 plus Andaman Nicobar, that is 140. 140 plus Jharkhand 14, that is 154. So there are about 154. 154 is the total number of seats in the states where there is a direct Congress BJP fight. Okay, that is not counting allies. Plus Chandigarh. Okay, that is 155. So if you add up the states and union territories where there is that is Himachal, Uttarakhand, Chandigarh, not Haryana, because Haryana is Congress versus either Chautala's party, Delhi, yes, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Daman and Diu, Dadra Nagar Haveli, Goa, Karnataka, Jharkhand, and Andamans. So that adds up to 155 seats. Now in those 155 direct Congress BJP fights, even if the BJP defeats Congress completely, they get 155 seats. So then they still have to go to 272. So it's not easy. UP, the biggest state, is basically SP versus BSP. Congress and BJP are number 3, number 4.